talking. I walk and talk.
Yeah.
And they come to L.A. and they take an 8-week class in on-camera audition technique, and then they start worrying about getting an agent. But the problem is, say you get an agent and then you get a job. If you don't know how to do it, you're never going to work for that producer or that director or that television show again. And you want to be booking the second job. You don't want to be booking the first job. You want to get rehired. And too many people just think acting is easy, is walking and talking, and it's not. It's a real craft that takes a lot of study and a lot of work.
And a lot of different types of study. As you mentioned, you teach 2 different types of classes. How important do you think improvisation, I always have a problem saying that, is, acting classes?
Improvisation is an important skill. I would have to say that of everything, that is where I am the weakest. I haven't studied improv per se. I've done a lot of improv in the course of regular acting classes where they say, well, let's improvise around this scene a little bit and see if we can figure some things out. But improv is a technique unto itself, as in Second City or Viola Spolin and all that stuff that my dad did back in the day with Paul Sills and those people. I didn't study that. I think partly because it was so much my dad's forte that I stayed away, but also because, as I said, I'm more the academic, so I'm always going to the text. And when I teach and I've assigned scenes to people and they come in and they're saying, well, I think it would be interesting if, I say, where is it in the text? It's not, it doesn't matter that you think it would be interesting. If you can't justify it in the text,
you can't justify it, period.
You can't justify it, yeah.
Right. Well, speaking of text, you are an author. And you wrote In the Country of the Blind. It's a suspense novel and the first in a series of books to come. Now, did you always want to write?
It didn't occur to me. I did a lot of writing in college, but mostly essays, and occasionally I would try my hand at a short story for something, and I would get an A, but I never had the confidence to keep pursuing it. But I've been a passionate devourer of that genre, the suspense thriller genre, since I was about 9 years old. And I would, pick up the first book in a series, and then, like when I discovered John D. MacDonald, I think the first one I read was The Girl in the Plain Brown Wrapper. And then it was suddenly like within a few weeks I'd plowed through the entire John D. MacDonald, Travis McGee canon. Same thing with people like John Sanford or Lawrence Block's Matthew Scudder series. I get hooked on a character. And then when I was reading the Matthew Scudder books, I saw that Lawrence Block had also written some books on writing. Spiders Spin Me a Web was, I think, the first book on writing of his that I read. And that planted the idea in my head, and I don't remember if it was planted the idea in my head or if my ex-wife said, "Why don't you try writing?" But somehow the idea got stuck in my head to try my hand at it. And my mother is an author of some adult, but YA and then smaller children's stuff, and recently some adult stuff. And she always said, write what you know. That's what you should do, is whenever you're writing, write what you know, which is the same thing that you should do as an actor, act what you know. The character should come from inside you. So I spent a lot of time sort of playing around with who this character would be before I came up with the story. I really wanted the character to have a backstory that could sustain him. And give him also a reason for pursuing the life that he leads as an investigator. So I created a character somewhat based on me, in that, like me, he was the academic in his family, went to law school, sort of branched away from the family business, went to law school, practiced law, became disillusioned with it, and quit in a moment of folly, as I did. The difference between Zach and me is that I quit because I had a passion also that I wanted to turn to. As disillusioned as I was with the law, I also had something that was calling me. He doesn't. He just got out of it because he'd had enough and didn't like where his life was going. So at the beginning of the book, we find him about 2 years later really kind of lost and not knowing what his life means, and all of his friends from law school and his former life, when he sees them, are like, what the hell are you doing with your life? And he goes out on a first date with an incredibly attractive young woman, and they're having a nice time, even though she doesn't seem to be the brightest light in the sky. And he walks her home, and her roommate has been murdered. At the beginning of the book, the roommate's been murdered, and the cops are, she's shattered and upset, and the cops, of course, are trying to question her right then, because you've got that 48-hour window.
Right.
And they're going after her, not as a suspect, but they're trying to get information, and Zach is like, hey, she's upset. Can you leave her, give her some space? And the lead detective, who's kind of abrasive, basically turns to him, and he's like trying to get rid of him and says, look, this was your first date, you said? And Zach's like, yeah. He says, well, you're not getting laid tonight, so get out of here. Leave her alone,
I had to laugh when I read that.
Yeah, we've got a job to do. And so Zach says, well, is she a suspect? And the cop, just to get rid of him, says, yeah, she's a suspect, okay? Go away. And Zach says, oh, well, if she's a suspect, then I'm her attorney, and you can't speak to her. So really, just to impress the girl, he gets in the middle of it. But then as he starts asking questions, his relationship with this girl, I don't want to give too much away, but it's really the questions about this poor guy who was murdered, and he starts to see similarities between events in this victim's life and his life, so he gets caught up in trying to find some meaning behind these events. And then in solving the murder and in orchestrating his own brand of justice around it, he finds his new way in life.
Well, I'll tell you, as I was reading the first 5 chapters, excuse me, and by the way, thank you for putting those out there. I thought to myself, I wonder if Matthew acts out these words in his head while he's typing them out. Is that what authors do? Do you picture every single scene in your head before you write it down, just to make sure it works?
I don't know if other authors do. I certainly do, and then I read the dialogue out loud afterwards to make sure it's ringing true. But there were times, I've heard other authors, I've heard my mother talk about, and I'm sure you have too, these people who say, I don't know, this character just showed up and started talking. And I would always say, yeah, right. Like, tell me you didn't plan that. That doesn't happen. That's like voodoo spiritual blah blah blah.
Yeah.
and I worked very hard plotting this book in many ways. But there was one part about halfway through where I got to a place and I was working on it, and I suddenly realized, oh my God, that won't work, because if he finds that out here, then he's got enough. And I sat at my computer. I was in Starbucks, which is where I like to work. I sat there for maybe an hour just thinking, I've created a problem for myself that I can't solve. I don't know how to solve this problem. Am I going to have to go replot this whole thing? And then something said, just start writing. And I started writing, and a character came through the door this guy I hadn't thought of before came through the door and started talking to Zach, and they get into an argument, and the solution to the problem came out of this guy's mouth. And I was like, oh, okay,
now you know what they were talking about.
That was like an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that somehow, if you've been kicking these things around long enough, there's something in your subconscious that's trying to get out, and your job is to get out of the way and let it come out.
Well, I give you credit for being able to do that. There was times in my life that I sat down to try to write a book because I always felt that there was a book in me, but never got anywhere with it. And maybe I need to take some classes or something, but I have such high esteem for everybody that's an author because I'm an avid reader as well. And I just absolutely love that I can sit there and read these books and have these characters playing out in my head like a movie.
Right.
So, and you do that. You do that with your book. After the first 5 chapters, I'm totally hooked on it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, the hardest thing about that first book, Pam, is just believing that you can do it. I mean, I've only written the one. I'm at work on the second. But I'm not nearly as daunted by the second because I know that if I sit down and write 2 pages a day, at the end of the year, I'm going to have a book.
Right.
Yeah, or even a page and a half. If you write a page and a half a day, you're going to have a book. And an old friend of mine used to say, when I'd say, I'm just worried it might not be any good, he said, so write a bad book.
Write
it.
Get it out of your system and then learn from it, I guess, right?
Yeah, but it is daunting. It is daunting.
It is. I mean, I start it, and then that's it. I just leave it. And I think what part of it is I fight myself is, should I make this a story about a character just out of the blue, or should I write this about my life or something, and that's what I go back and forth on. And it's not something that I think about every single day or every single year for that matter. It's just every few years this will pop in my head. So,
right.
Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should just write a page or something every once in a while and see what happens at the end of the year.
Yeah, you'll have something.
Right. Now, did you put those 5 chapters out there to hook us? Is that what you did that for?
Yes. And the book is completely done. It's been edited. It's had a lot of editorial input. It's been rewritten. But I put the first 5 chapters out there because I'm running this Kickstarter campaign to raise the money to self-publish it. And I felt like people in the Kickstarter campaign, before they invest, either $1 or, I've had a couple of people throw in $1,000. Most of them have been somewhere, between $5 and $25, which is great, because Kickstarter is all about getting to your goal. So, but I felt like before people do that, they're going to want to say, can this guy write at all?
Right.
Is this a story that interests me? So those first 5 chapters are up there for people to read and say, hey, I think this is a story I want to read the rest of. And they, most people are throwing down their $25 because for the $25 you get the signed first edition and the very, very exciting laminated signed bookmark.
Right.
That's the exciting thing, I think. But for $1,000, you get a character named after you in the next book. So,
wow. That would be pretty neat.
Wow, that would be something, wouldn't it?
Actually, 4 people have kicked in at that level, but 2 of them don't want the character named after them. They just threw in.
Really?
Yeah. But 2 of them do. One friend of mine, she threw in $1,000, and she said, "I'm sure you're going to make it a hooker. You're going to make me a hooker, aren't you?"
That's fun.
Oh my gosh. Well, I also want people to know that there's a video that you did for Kickstarter about the book, and I couldn't tell you how much I laughed when I saw that video.
Me too.
It was so funny.
Yes,
yeah.
It was hysterical.
Oh,
How did you come up with that idea?
Well, I'll tell.